we're moving into our first conversation for this morning as we talk about what we need to do to protect our tapirs. We have with us on set Selson Poot, who is the tapir researcher for the Belize Tapir Project at the Belize Zoo. We also have Lee McLaughlin, who is the terrestrial coordinator for Wildlife Conservation Society. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you.
Good morning, Marlene, and thank you.
Well, I wish you were here under better circumstances, but I think we all saw the story last week, and it was really disturbing to see the images of our national animal in that manner. And I wanted to kind of just start off by getting an overview of the type of protection, or I should say projects that are in place to protect the tapirs. So let's start with yours, Selson.
First of all, I wanna say it's a good thing that that incident got national coverage, because it's not the first time we're recording a tapir that's been butchered like that. About 2 years ago, we had one up in the Corozal area near the border where it was butchered in a similar manner, and the carcass was removed from the road and thrown in the bush. Took us a while to find it. So it's the second carcass we've found like that, but also we've found carcass in the Sibun River thrown like that, and also up in the Cayo, the Vaca area in the Cayo district. So it's not a secret that tapir meat is still being consumed. So I'm glad that we're making something out of that sad story to bring national attention to one of the major threats to tapir in the entire region is hunting.
Yeah. See, that was my first question when you came in. We had that conversation off air. I think because we all have the respect for it as a national animal, not many of us have thought of how people may actually consume tapir as game meat.
Fortunately for Belize, since independence, the tapir gained the national animal status, and a lot of effort has been put forth for the protection of the tapir. In the region, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Honduras, tapirs are still hunted heavily. So hunting remains one of the greatest threat to the species survival in the region.
Yeah, yeah. Now, talk to me about the Belize Tapir Project. I think one thing that immediately came to mind was the tapir crossing conversation that we'd had a while back, and this being the result of an accident, clearly it still remains a major issue.
It is a major issue. In central Belize, we're talking about the Borel Boom Road, Hattieville Road from Hattieville to about mile 8, Ladyville Road from about Manatee Lookout to the Boom Junction. We've recorded more than 30 tapirs being killed by cars over a 11-year period. That's significant because tapirs, they're the largest land mammal in this area, and they have a low reproductive rate, which means that you don't get a baby tapir until 1 every 3 years. And the babies stay with their mom for about a full year. They have a gestation period of 13 months, so pregnancy of 13 months. You stay with mom for a year, so you're looking at 1 every 3 years. And they live to about 18 to 20 years in the wild, so you're not going to get a lot of tapirs. You're not going to repopulate the area if you're having high incidence of mortality.
Yeah, yeah. Now, Lee, let's talk a bit about your work as the terrestrial coordinator for Wildlife Conservation Society.
Yeah, so in relation to tapir and many types of wildlife, one of the main things that we're trying to work on is the conservation of forests. So they all need a place to live. It's the habitat. And as Celso rightly pointed out, one of the major threats to tapir is hunting, but another significant one is the loss of their habitat. So we're seeing multiple threats layering on top of each other, which really combine to cause a severe threat. Belize definitely has some of the highest forest cover in the region. Most Belizeans are probably aware of that. We're still hovering around about 60% of coverage, but we are starting to see a real acceleration in forest clearance. I'm sure driving around Belize, people are seeing some really huge areas being cleared and cut down. That is area that would support a number of tapirs.
Yeah.
So in this case, we have to look at, for the conservation of tapir, we need to look at the conservation of their habitat blocks, but also the connections between those blocks, so where the tapirs move between one block and another, which is a big focus of Celso's work.
Now that area of the Philip Golson Highway, I think of two things. One, it's highly trafficked. But secondly, we know that there's substantial work taking place with the construction of the new highway. Do you think that this perhaps has an implication in the movement of the tapirs?
Definitely. The Mile 8 bypass, that area has high density of tapir. So the question we're trying to find out is, really, what have the tapirs in that area? Why are they there? Are they coming from another area and they're trying to find place to spread out? Or are they stuck in that area, they're isolated because we have small fragments, forest fragments? My work...
Why would they be stuck there? Sorry.
Because they have nowhere else to go.
Okay, because they want to move from forest cover to forest cover?
This most recent tapir collision, that entire area has been cleared.
Yeah.
There's no more forest there. You have canals and you have land being developed. But that area used to house at least 3 tapirs that we know about. So they move around Manatee Lookout, they move around Vista Del Mar. All that area, I've seen that area develop, and I've seen tapir being pushed to be living in an area that are not more suitable for them.
Now, when you know that there are tapirs in an area where there's development taking place, or especially if you're talking about Vista Del Mar, there's a residential area. Manatee Lookout is, there's just that little patch of forest there by the riverside. Is there ever an attempt to perhaps locate them and move them to another area?
We've actually, we tried to, we removed one from Lord's Bank that we rescued.
Yeah.
However, she was going to be a pilot because we would have put a GPS collar on her and look at her movement when we translocate her. However, on the advice of the vets, we were not able to release her back into the wild because she was old, she had some teeth problem, dental problem, and wouldn't have been able to survive in the wild. So that was one opportunity we wanted to do. The problem is that no one has really studied tapir in Belize to the extent that we can do this sort of work. Thankfully, there are 2 researchers in Belize now who are looking at tapir's ecology. So how much space do they need? I mean, we're referencing literature from other areas, from Mexico, from Costa Rica, from Guatemala, but Belize as a country, we haven't done much research on tapirs. So my colleague, Wilbur Martinez, who works with the Foundation for Wildlife Conservation, is doing similar work to what I'm doing in another area in Belize. And so we need to find out how much land we need for a tapir, or how much land we need for a tapir to move. We don't know. And the only way we will do that,
animals.
the only way we'll be able to do that is by studying them, studying their movement. My work is looking at how roads influence their movement, how roads influence their home range size and their core use area. So how much space do we need with roads for tapirs to survive and live the way they should?
And you'd identified some hot spots before for your tapir crossing signs that you'd put up, right?
Right, and those hotspots were identified based on the number of mortalities in those areas.
Yeah.
So 5, 6 tapir deaths within 3-kilometer span of the road. With 2 spots in Boom, obviously there are more areas that we have recorded collision. But when we look at these, when the roads were being built, wildlife were not taken into consideration. They have a challenge crossing the road. So you'll find that tapirs are crossing the road where they're not steep, and they just try to zoom across the road. They have challenges in areas with big drains to climb those and get across the road. So they would walk along the road until they find an area where they can cross. So we've documented this with cameras along the Boral Boom Road, and that is how we were able to put up the Tapir crossing signs in those locations.
Would that area of the Philip Golson Highway be considered, because this is not the first accident or collision, Tapir collision, that we've seen there. Do we perhaps need to designate this as a Tapir crossing area as well?
Yeah, I would recommend that we put a Tapir crossing sign there. We can work with the Ministry of Works to get the necessary permission to put the sign up.
Yeah.
And that is something we'll be looking at.
Now, from your experience, you can tell me if perhaps this has been effective, because it's like the old story, you can build it, but it doesn't mean they'll come. Have you seen change in behavior with the implementation of these signs, reminding people that there is the possibility that a tapir may be on the road?
Interestingly, wildlife vehicle collision is a part of road ecology. Road ecology is a brand new area in ecology where you're looking at how roads influence the movement of wildlife in general.
Yeah.
There's a whole body of people in the region in Latin America that are now looking at how roads influence these animal movement. I did a presentation from my master's work in Costa Rica and showing what I did with the Tapir crossing sign. Most of the work you'll see says that wildlife crossing sign don't work because they're only there for a short while. However, I spent countless hours along the Boom Road, like being on the road with a life-size paper mache tapir, bringing attention to people that tapir are crossing the road, put it on the speed bump, on the pedestrian crossing, handing out bumper sticker, handing out flyers to the driver, showing them.
Yeah.
What we saw was, before I implemented the wildlife crossing sign, we did some speed survey where drivers were driving 90, 95 miles an hour on the Boral Boom Road.
Wow.
At night, because this is when most of the collision happened.
Yeah.
We installed the signs and we did this awareness, this advocacy work along the Boom Road, and we redid the survey, the speed survey, and we saw significant reduction in speed in the area. We also had no tapir collision for that entire year along the Boom Road.
Okay.
So they work.
So by your estimation, it's been effective so far?
They're effective, but it needs to be continuous. It's not a one-shot thing. You need to be out there.
Yeah. No, because it reminds me also, I'm trying to remember if it was Panthera, but it was one of the organizations that did the Jaguar corridor. And it's something that as you approach the area, you start to think about it. At least it triggers that that consideration in your mind. And jaguars, and especially tapirs, just tug at our hearts as Belizeans. But I think the point that you're getting at, which is a critical one, is what type of, if there's a development taking place, we have to do an environmental impact assessment. How is wildlife and wildlife movement factored into this? Or is this an afterthought that we're having now?
More and more, we're seeing wildlife. Well, wildlife should be a part of any environmental impact assessment that is done, because you need to do a survey and see what wildlife are present out there and how they will be affected, and you need to develop mitigation plans on how to address whatever impact you will have on the wildlife. For example, the airport link road, the recommendation they made for that was put rumble strips.
What are rumble strips?
Rumble strips are these little like scrubbing board type of bumps you put on the road, so when you fly over them you make a noise.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
so I don't know if it's to alert drivers or to alert the tapir, but that obviously won't work. on
you don't have to slow down for those.
No. Right.
Usually in combination with a rear bump.
Yeah, I mean, other concern is the coastal road, the proposed pavement of the coastal road. We hope that consideration is being made for wildlife crossing, because that area is critical for the animals that are moving between the northern forest and the southern forest in the country. So I hope that it's not just rumble strips they're proposing for that.
Yeah, And it did go into the EIA apparently, the road crossings for the coastal road. So we'll see if they make it into the reality of the construction, because there's been some success just up north in the Yucatan area. I don't know if any of the viewers have driven around Yucatan or Quintana Roo, but some of the newest highways up there have actual wildlife underpasses. So it's a tunnel that goes underneath the road with a funnel that guides the wildlife to go through, and they've documented with camera trap footage that those are working for multiple species, including jaguar and tapir. They also tried some overpasses, like rope ladders that go across the road. They've been less successful for what they call arboreal mammals, ones that use only the trees. But wildlife crossings definitely work. They need to go in at the beginning of a road development, though. It's kind of after the fact is the expensive way round, but to put them in while the road is being constructed is the best time to do it.
And I mean, as environmental organizations or environmentalists in general, what's the level of engagement, especially when it comes to wildlife? Because I know we do a lot of work in talking about what the impact on the forest is, but even now, having this conversation, it really does seem to be an afterthought about what happens to the animals. We just figure they'll survive on their own.
So one of the things the Latin America Working Group is trying to do is to address it through the financing agency, through the IDB, through the World Bank. We're trying to push for them to ensure that any road development that you fund need to take into consideration wildlife crossing.
Yeah. And we're so proud of the species that we do have that are being researched, that are being protected in some way or the other. You mentioned the coastal road, we have the airport link, we have the boom road. When you look at the landscape of the forests that are used by wildlife, how many of these actually perhaps sever the connection of the forest?
They all do.
Yeah.
I mean, the coastal road as it is right now isn't a big threat per se, because the road is so bad you have minimal.
You have to slow down. Yeah.
You can't speed. For example, not far from the zoo, like around mile 34, there's this photo that was viral of a jaguar crossing the road. The jaguar crossing the road has about maybe 300 feet of opening to cross, and jaguar will be very, very careful how he crosses the road there. However, that entire area to the left, if you're driving to Belmopan, has been cleared. It's about 3,200 acres of broadleaf forest that's been cleared. Now the jaguar not only have to cross the road, but they have to cross that entire, which from the Sibun all the way to the highway to navigate. So it's not only the road, it's the new farming development, everything that is going on.
Yeah. And I think that the picture you painted of the tapir perhaps wandering on the road to find the best part to come off of it is something we didn't take into consideration. When I imagine a jaguar crossing, I imagine it just zipping across, and a tapir clearly at a slower pace, but also moving directly across. But that's not what we're seeing in their behavior.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to trap more tapirs, fit them with GPS collars, and look, as I said earlier, look how roads in particular, the main roads, the secondary roads, how they influence the tapir movement.
Yeah.
So we're going to do this in the area with roads, and we're going to do this in areas that don't have roads. And we're going to see whether tapir move farther in areas with no roads versus those that have roads. So we're going to compare, and by doing this type of research, we'll be able to make good, solid recommendation based on science to the government for any future development, special development areas, land use, those sort of things.
That's definitely a critical development in your work with tapir research, I'd imagine. Because we don't have any GPS tracking system for tapir so far. Do we?
Yeah, we have two projects. So my project is working in the Boreal Boom area, and my colleague Wilbur is working along the coastal road on Runaway Creek. So we have two active projects where we're trapping tapir with GPS collars to see how they're moving across the landscape.
And what do we know so far?
We can't deduce anything yet. We can tell you that
Do they move a lot? Do they kind of stay in one area?
it all depends on several variables. For example, right now we're experiencing this dry. So you see, for example, Wilbur Tapir is moving like every 10 days. You have to make a trip all the way to the Siboon River to get water because water is scarce out there.
Yeah.
Also, tapir in general take about 10 to 12 days for them to cycle through their home range. Yeah, so
they do like a patrol? They move around there?
yeah, so an animal home range basically is all that area they use in their life cycle. And then the core use area is the area where they spend most of their time. So like 50% of the time they spend it, that's where they feed, that's where they do all their business. So and those are important when you're making management recommendation, because you know how much land they need in a worst case scenario, and in the best case scenario, this is what they need, and so that is helpful.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to mention, you touched on the importance of water to the tapir. They love water, and right now everybody knows we're experiencing a drought. So their access to water becomes more and more important, and then that can start to limit their potential range, because one thing we do know is that they can't live without water.
Yeah.
And as that starts to become more scarce, we're experiencing acceleration of climate change. All the predictions of the International Panel on Climate Change are saying we're going to see more extended droughts more frequently, increased temperatures and less overall rainfall. So those kind of forested corridors, access to water points that join tapir habitat to other water courses are going to become more and more important.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we're going to see an increase in the population of Belize.
Yeah.
We're going to see an increase in the number of vehicles on the road. So I don't want to depress people, but it really what that just shows is the urgency of taking decisive action when it comes to the conservation of the animals.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because you know the development projects that we have mentioned, whether it's the airport road or the boom road or the pavement of the coastal road, you know, by many sectors it's welcomed, that type of development. You want to be able to move through faster the country and more safely as well. So it's not necessarily that you can move to the direction where you want to stop projects like this. So what's the right balance that we're trying to seek here?
It's the balance between people, between the economy, and the environment. Right? So interdisciplinary ecology doesn't only look at the environment. It looks at, as I said, the social needs. So we need the roads. We need to make sure that the roads are being built taking into consideration the environment, because roads don't only really affect wildlife, it affects watershed. You know, you get a lot of silt, a lot of sediment after the road is built. You disturb the flow of fish, frogs. It's more than just the tapir we're talking about. So, but we're also looking at, if you pave the city coastal road, you're looking at the movements of goods and services that would be welcome by business people. So we need to strike that balance between, as I said, the environment, the social aspect, and what's the third one I said?
Economy.
The economy, yeah.
And I think like one of the ways to achieve that is to do planning. So there's still a big need to have an actual national land use plan where there's decisions are made as to where you know, economic development is going to take place, where infrastructural development is going to take place, where protected areas for biodiversity and watersheds need to be, where human habitation needs to be. That is still lacking at a national scale. It's been in process for many years. Been lots and lots of consultations and meetings about it, but we still don't have that to guide where these kind of developments should be. which could satisfy that balance between those three
Right.
pillars of society.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any areas that you feel that people perhaps need to know that there's, and it can be tapir or it can be any other wildlife that is just thriving, and perhaps we're not really considering what we need to do to maintain what is in place?
In wildlife move across the landscape for several reasons. For mating, for food, for water. As I said, for their home range. So I've seen 2 jaguars in the wild, and I've not seen them in a protected area. I've seen them along the road. You know, so people come and invest a lot of time in protected areas to see wildlife, but they move. And so I've seen, so drivers need to be cautious. Users of the highways and the back roads need to be cautious at all times, because a collision does not only mean a wildlife death. I mean, it can be serious, and we can have human death,
Yes.
human casualty. So we need to be taking that into consideration as well.
Now, I want to ask about what was subsequently done to the tapir after the collision, butchering it for the use of the meat. That's an offense, isn't it?
It is an offense, yeah. The tapir is an endangered species internationally. And yes, it is an offense. The tapir is protected in Belize under the Wildlife Protection Act.
So what you're saying is, even though it was already dead, you can't butcher it and take the meat.
No, you shouldn't butcher it and take the meat. No,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
You seem offended by my question. I know nobody wants to imagine that somebody
Well,
does these, but I'm just saying that we need to have people know, because, I mean, if I'm passing and I see that, and we see people pick up roadkill sometimes,
Yeah.
But it is an offense in this country.
yeah, I actually sometimes like get fresh carcass on the road, and people would ask me for it. Give me the leg. You're going to throw it away anyway. Yeah, it shows that a lot of work needs to be done. I mean, but things hard out there, right?
Yeah.
Things hard out there, and the reality is that we have depleted our game meat. So the peccary, the gibnut, they're no longer there. So I hope seeing a resurgence of people going to tapir because there are no more game meat out there. I hope not.
Yeah, and I think, as Celso mentioned earlier, they take a long time to breed. They couldn't handle being targeted as a form of game meat. So right now it seems to be an opportunistic thing. We actually did some surveys a couple of years ago on how Belizeans use wildlife. And some people reported consumption of tapir. Sometimes it was in an opportunistic, let's say it was a revenge for crop raiding, which had happened in the south and somewhat in Cayo. But it was isolated incidents. It wasn't really something nationally, like a trend that people were now wanting to eat
It's not
tapir.
like Central American countries where they're targeting
Exactly,
tapir.
yeah, exactly. But that's the thing to be careful of in Belize. We don't want to see that switch to actually something that becomes targeted, because I would imagine we would start to see a really drastic drop in populations.
And how healthy is our population at this time?
Based on what we're seeing, I would say we have a healthy population.
What are the measures for that?
Well, just looking at the density we have, like for example, in the central Belize area, we don't really have any study to say how many tapirs we have. That's usually the question most people ask. So how many tapirs do you have in a Belize? You know, and that's a hard question to answer, because one, a lot of studies haven't been done on them.
Yeah.
And two, you don't want to be shooting out numbers for people to say, oh, we have a lot of tapir. We can afford to lose a few of them, you know. We don't want to do that.
No.
But what we want to make sure is that we don't lose the tapir from our forests, because why are they important? I mean, being the largest herbivore in the forest, they're key to reforestation. They consume a lot of forage, and in that forage they consume fruits. So they take seeds and they defecate it in other parts of the forest that don't have trees. And tapir consume about 50 pounds of food for the day. So they're also nutrient recyclers. So they pass all this forage that they eat through their digestive system. And then when they poop, they drop that, and that is then recycled in the system.
So there are natural seed dispensers.
So they are seed dispersers. They're what we call ecosystem engineers, forest gardeners, ecosystem engineers, and nutrient recyclers. Yeah.
Now, you know, I appreciate what you said, but not wanting to give a number and have people feel that we're doing well or not so well. But you keep on saying repeatedly in this conversation that we don't do enough research on tapir. Why is that the case? Is it just because we felt that they were doing well for so long that we didn't have to spend as much time investigating them?
That's a good question. Why? I don't know why. I think we had a good education, a good awareness campaign in Belize. For many years, we had April spreading the message across Belize. But researching tapir is not an easy task. You spend weeks in the forest trying to capture a tapir to study it. And they're smart. They're smart. I mean,
they figure some things up and they stay away?
And they stay away, yeah. So they're smart. I had a group of students working with me from UB last year, June. And the tapir just walk right up to the trap, sniff, turn, flash us, and walk back. And I said, you know, if these tapirs are so smart, how comes they can't avoid the cars? And the student said, sir, it's not the tapir, it's the drivers. The drivers, we need to address them. And so, the work continue. We need to address the human side of it.
So let me just clarify, though, because my assumption is that they just can't move that fast when they're on the road. Are they fast-moving animals?
If they're threatened, they can move fast. However, if you're driving 70, 75 miles an hour and a 500-pound animal is on the road in front of you, it's dark and they blend with the road.
Yeah, they're dark.
It's hard for you to avoid a collision. I don't think anyone really wants to kill a tapir for two reasons. They're a national animal, they're protected. And two, if you hit a tapir 500 pounds,
there has to be damage to the car.
Correct.
I know.
Yeah.
And so the person who perhaps was involved in this collision definitely has some damage that shows.
Right.
Is that also an offense if I have a tapir collision on the road?
There's some gray area there. Your life come first.
Yeah.
But there's no intent, right? I don't think people mean to do it, and it'll be hard to prove anyway.
Yeah.
I think the main thing to appeal to is people's national pride. It's a national animal. It's a beautiful animal. Everybody's visited Belize Zoo and seen them, if they haven't had the chance to see them in the wild, right?
Right.
I think that's a better appeal, really, in this case.
So we know that on the Boom Road, it's a preferred crossing area. We know that on the Philip Golson Highway near the airport is also another well-traversed area. Coastal Road, you mentioned before. Right. Where else?
Your work in southern Belize?
Yeah.
In the south?
The Golden Stream Corridor Preserve is what's called the Southern Biological Corridor. So there's definitely crossings in that area. You've got forests right to both sides of the road, a good long stretch of that. So we've got a Northern Biological Corridor, Central Biological Corridor, and a Southern one. And those are some really key crossing points. We
haven't had many reports of incidents like this in the south. Is it just because it's less traffic?
I think there's a lot less traffic in the south. Yeah, that's an area I have more experience with. I spent 6 years down there. And I know that there's not much traffic from when I used to try hitchhike. But yeah, so there's an avoidance factor, and there's also a lot more places to cross because there's a lot more forest in the south. There's still, I think, 90% forest coverage in Toledo district. So yeah, it's different.
Are there any other innovative ideas that you've seen perhaps in the region or other parts of the world that we can perhaps, the tunnel idea, that's fascinating, like Subway Express for animals. Great movie idea. But what else have you seen in other areas that they've done to try to assist in reaching the balance. The wildlife has to cross the road to get to the different areas of the forest, and we need to use it too to move around.
As Lee said earlier, any wildlife crossing structure needs to be done in the planning, in the implementation stage. Otherwise, you're looking at balancing your social issues in the country versus putting in a multi-million-dollar crossing for wildlife. Who comes first?
Yeah.
Right? So that is the reason why we were lobbying to make sure that these structures, these mitigation plans are in place before the road goes in. In Costa Rica, they're retrofitting like underpasses, so culverts that were not designed for wildlife crossing. They are retrofitting these culverts, and jaguars and tapirs are using them. So they're making them more wildlife friendly. They're directing the wildlife to those areas. The same in Mexico. Mexico building their new road, as Lee said, they're putting them in place one time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in the region, they're retrofitting these underpasses.
So we know the airport link road is underway. Are you aware of any considerations for wildlife crossing other than the little bumps that you told me about?
That's all that I saw in the EIA, and when the presentation was made, I questioned that because I attended the EIA presentation, but that was all that's in place. So the goal is to monitor and see what impact it will have, if any, on the tapir population in that area.
An underpass would be difficult there because it's swampy as well.
Yeah.
So you have to consider the environment as well when you're coming up with those solutions.
All right, well, let's hope just this conversation starts to broaden our awareness on the fact that we do have to have a thought of what will take place with wildlife movement before we venture into some of these developments, and not an afterthought after incidents like this. But I do want to close off because, every time I have you, I learn something new about tapirs, and we're approaching September. The kids are going to get back into school. They will have this as homework as well. But tell me some of the interesting facts about tapirs that you find most people don't know. Either one.
You grow up and they tell you that if the tapir catch your dog and skin your dog alive.
Okay, I never heard that one. I don't know who was telling you that.
That's one of the myths, right? The tapir are herbivores. They have no interest in your dog.
Okay.
So tapirs are herbivores.
Yeah, so they don't want any meat. They want your mango tree.
Your mango, your cashew, right, definitely. Crabo, that is what they will go for.
Yeah.
Tapir have the ability to swim underwater.
Oh,
so that's
they're good divers?
Yep, swimmers.
Swimmers.
Yeah, they can stay underwater for a little while. So that's one of the ways they elude their predator, the jaguar. Or also hunter, they just run straight and disappear under the water and come up on the other side of the river.
Wow.
So they're good swimmers.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's why we don't see them on the surface of the water moving.
They just walk along the bottom.
All right, and your favorite fact about tapirs?
Mine's kind of disgusting in a way, in that I was always fascinated to see when I used to go through hiking through the bush, these kind of like white stains that were across the leaves and trees. And then I was told one day that it's tapir pee, and it's like milk. And so when they pee, it just creates this big like white, almost like paint, across the leaves and trees. So I was like, that's pretty cool,
That's okay.
So I'll leave you with that.
Right. When I see white marks when you go hiking, clearly that's what people remember.
What it is.
But I could imagine, you have the kids at the zoo and they're asking a lot of questions. You have all these little facts that you throw out to them. The gestation period is definitely one I think a lot of women felt just now. 13 months, that's long.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in. And of course, this is just an effort on our part to remind people of why we protect the tapir, how we can assist, and just to know a bit more about your work. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right. We're going to go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, we'll be joined by cyclist Kaya Katus. So please stay tuned.